Miles Taylor, you are sort of our only sort of living witness into what Donald Trump does when he's back on his heels. And this retreat from Minneapolis is one such example. I mean, often, you know, like a bad storm, retreats, gathers strength, and sort of attacks somewhere else. What is your sense of what this retreat means?
Yeah, I think that retreat is maybe even a word that gives people too much comfort. I really think this is a reset, and I want to be optimistic about it. I mean, I think the bravery of the people of Minnesota allowed this to happen, but we cannot be complacent. You remember, Nicole, that famous scene in Star Wars when Luke Skywalker's in the Millennium Falcon and he shoots a TIE fighter, and Han Solo turns to him and he says, "Great kid, don't get cocky." They still have to take out the Death Star. And this is one of those moments. We can't be complacent about what happened here. Yes, the people of Minnesota put the Trump administration back on its heels, but Donald Trump will not give this up. Now, I imagine there's some infighting between people like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, who have very different views about this. But let's not forget, we were on the cusp of the president of the United States invoking the Insurrection Act. It didn't happen because Trump did not like how it was playing on television. Mark my words, he will try to foment the circumstances for it to play better for him. And that's probably what they are doing right now at the White House, looking at what states they could go to next, looking at what circumstances they could create that would, create a better optic for the president. And they're going to go after it again. Remember, just days ago, Trump's immigration chiefs testified before Congress that their mandate from the president was a mass deportation plan. They are not revising the underlying policy here. They're just stepping back from one state where it didn't go well.
John Heilemann, that didn't happen by accident. I mean, Mayor Frey and Tim Walz and the senator were communicating to their constituents to not take the bait, to not give Donald Trump that theater to sort of produce what he wanted to produce. That was very deliberate, that all the protests were peaceful, even in the wake of these two horrific killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy.
Yeah, and Nicole, I agree with everything Miles just said a second ago. I don't think that, I think it's absolutely appropriate for people to breathe a sigh of relief, particularly the people in Minneapolis, and around the country. I mean, everybody wanted that nightmare to end, and obviously trust but verify. We'll make sure that we'll keep watching to make sure that they actually are doing what they say they're going to do. I do think that it's all dress rehearsal. There's been this upward movement from, as we go through this, I count it every time I feel like I talk about this, but from Los Angeles to Washington to Chicago to Minneapolis, there's just been an increase, and importantly, an increase in the number of agents, federal agents on the street, but also importantly, a realization, you'll remember back in Los Angeles, we were all freaking out about the fact that, and rightly so, that Donald Trump had deployed some Marines to Los Angeles, and that was unconstitutional or illegal, violating posse comitatus. I think that one of the things that happened over the course of that time was that Trump realized that the military might be just too professional for him to carry out what he wants to get done in these cities, both in terms of the deportation agenda, but also as a dress rehearsal for what might happen at the polls in November. And there was a realization as he went through these various trial runs, these dress rehearsals, that ICE was the better agent for him than the U.S. military. Who knows? Somebody who actually is a senior ranking person in the military might stand up at some point and say, sorry, we're not going to do this, President Trump, because it violates posse comitatus, because it's not in keeping with our mission and with our oath to the Constitution. No one in ICE is going to say that. Donald Trump has figured out that ICE is the way to go if you want to exercise these kind of repressive and violent tactics and these kind of intimidating tactics that are all designed to build up people, not in Minneapolis, but around the country, watching what happened in Minneapolis. As much as they admire, millions of us admire what people were doing on the streets in resistance in Minneapolis, people also are looking at what happened in Minneapolis and saw two execution-style murders on the streets of Minneapolis. And there are going to be people around the country who are going to be left with a residue of fear because of what they saw on the part of the government in Minneapolis. And so I think, this just is to amplify Miles's point. None of these things should be taken in isolation. We have to be able to look at them as a continuum, as an escalation, and we have to look at what the end game is. And the end game I think, is not just an end game that has to do with the deportation agenda. I think the end game has to do with the elections in November.
Senator, I saw you nodding every time the elections in November came up. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is on New Year's Eve, 2025, the Department of Homeland Security sent out a public statement basically saying they want to achieve 100 million deportations. That is a third of the population in the United States of America. There are not 100 million immigrants in this country. And we have seen in Minnesota that they are targeting Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous people through terrorizing, harassment, detainment, detention, deportation. They have deported U.S. citizens. And Trump has said he wants to deport U.S. citizens. And so we absolutely should see Minnesota as the test case for how they want to achieve their stated goal, which is to remove 1/3 of the population from this country, Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous. This was their first chance to show people what they wanted to do. They see that people don't like it, so they're going to look for a different way. But they are not acting like people who want to win elections. They're acting like people who have a plan to not have free and fair elections. And we've seen what they've done in Georgia. We've seen the cases that they filed. We've seen the attempts at the Supreme Court. We should be all on high alert for what they are planning in November, because that has come through very, very loud and clear in the last, year, but certainly in the last month or so.
Yeah, I mean, Miles, J.P. Cooley, who was Jack Smith's deputy on both the documents case and the January 6th case, said that the conduct that Donald Trump is engaged in now is the same conduct he was indicted for his activity after the 2020 election.
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuation of a criminal conspiracy. That's how you've got to look at it. I mean, when the news broke in Fulton County, for instance, a lot of people were taking the administration's bait and saying, well, the DNI was there. They are saying that there's some kind of foreign interference. They were creating this story and a little bit of mystery around that foreign interference. No, this is very clear what it was. Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office in an interview with Tom Yamas at NBC News and said, well, those FBI agents are going to find out who really won the 2020 election. I doubt his team wanted him to say that, but as always, Donald Trump let the secret slip. Whatever his team says their intentions were, it seems like the president of the United States wanted to conduct an illegal recount at the hands of federal agents, which again would violate the United States Constitution. The federal government is not responsible for doing something like that. And certainly the president can't unilaterally do that. But that seems to be what is happening here. And I think that spells danger for other states around this country. And I don't just think that. The president has said he's looking at California and other states. They are normalizing these other very obvious violations of states' rights, like we saw in Minnesota, like we've now seen in Georgia. They are going on the warpath of those violations because the president is terrified of losing this election. So I would say, in addition to immigration, on elections, states need to stay frosty. They need to have their lawsuits ready, because what happened in Fulton County is very likely to happen to others.